So not only does life not begin until you graduate high school, but really the fun doesn't begin until you're, 65? If you live that long,
Throw out homework, worksheets, ominous buildings, hall passes, herds of students, grades, all of it. What would you build? If you start with the amazing thing that is a young person, how would you honor all of their strengths and abilities? How would you remember that this is about them? If Dewey was right, and education is not preparation for life, education is life itself. We need to do more than rebuild schooling. We need to rethink living. Welcome to the Education is Life podcast, where we are having honest discussions on the state of education, where it is, where it can be, and all of the stories in between. Welcome back to Education is Life. Rob here. Today we have Ellison with us, who, in addition to being an amazing community member of Greenfields and a parent of one of our launchers, she is also an author of the book Go Your Own Way and an independent college counselor who works with students to help them find the right path for them and their future, and very much aligned with what we do at Greenfields, which I imagine is why she's here. But welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
So can you share a little bit about what your education was like when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up in rural northern Nevada, kind of along the California-Nevada border, close to Lake Tahoe. Really strange place to grow up because it's typically where people will go on vacation. And Nevada ranks near the bottom, if not at the bottom, depending on the year, in public education. A lot of it, I wouldn't blame the public school system for. A lot of it just has to do with the fact that the casino industry draws a pretty transient and ever-moving working population. So a lot of students just are not staying for very long, and they're leaving, and that sort of hurts the stats, if you will. But I did go to a public school, public elementary all the way through high school. My parents didn't graduate from college, don't have college degrees. And so I became really curious and excited about college when I was probably about 12 years old. I tell the story, I was garage sailing with my mother, like you do on Saturdays. And I just, like, something shiny on the ground caught my eye, and I picked it up, and it was this little broken piece of plastic that said Harvard on it. And there began my decades-long journey into and out of what I call the cult of college prestige. I was definitely a member of that cult for a long time, where I bought into this whole idea that a prestigious college makes you a more prestigious person and can, like, elevate your social status. And growing up as a middle child in a middle income family, in a medium-sized school, right? It felt very boring to me. And I really liked the idea of being able to kind of like catapult myself into a different class. And it was a very elitist way of looking at the world, but it was the way I looked at the world for quite a while. And so that's what I grew up with. And I couldn't wait to get out of school. I found it not boring. Like, I wasn't a crazy intelligent kid by any means. I definitely struggled in high school, but I hated how, like, patronizing it was. I remember just, like, hating being among people my own age. I really wanted to hang out with adults as a kid. I hated being, like, told to sit at the kids' table when I was really little, right? Like, I really wanted to hang out with the adults. And so I hated being in a school where I was only with kids. I wanted to, like, hang out with the teachers during lunch. Like, I was that kid. And so couldn't wait to get out. Was an exchange student in Germany my senior year of high school. And came back and went to college, and I graduated from Northwestern. Yeah, came back west after that with kind of my tail between my legs, wondering, like, what I had just spent so much money on. So, long story short, but Rob, this obsession with the elite is so because that was me for so long. When I see those students today, I get, like, almost worked up, where I have to kind of control myself, and I have to, like, meet them where they are. But it's so hard because I know, like, I'm looking at them and I know the long road that they face and how they're going to have to really deconstruct things.
And so I don't mean to say that Northwestern isn't Harvard, but
oh yeah. Oh no.
I know there are some people who believe that. I and so like you picked up the piece of plastic that's at Harvard that kind of got you thinking about elite schools, and that's what you're aiming for.
Mhm.
What do you think happens? Like, how does that happen today? Not every kid's walking around and picking up a little piece of plastic, out of the dumpster.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're hearing what people are talking about. They're seeing what's in the media, what's in popular movies. Usually we hear about the schools that are in the top 20. Even like, for example, I had a student whose mom took a picture of her in front of Princeton with the caption, "Wouldn't this be amazing?" Right? Like little subtle things like that that parents do. I don't think they realize that it's setting their child up for some psychological mess up that's gonna take a while to again deconstruct. It's like these mind bombs, because I had a student once who was like, yeah, I'm gonna go to Northeastern in Boston for computer science, and he was this very like kind of like structured, strict kid, like just like very practical and pragmatic about his future goals. And after I had worked with him for like a year, and so I would kind of mess with him a little bit because I knew this was his personality. And his name was Alex also, and I was like, well, yeah, I think that's great, Alex, but just keep the options open, because who knows, you might want to change your major to like art history. And like, and we kind of chuckled, and he was like, no, that's what you do after you retire. Like,
wow.
and and I was like, we were laughing, but then I was also like really disturbed by that comment, right?
Wow.
Fun. So not only does life not begin until you graduate high school, but really the fun doesn't begin until you're 65?
If you make it there.
If you live that long, like the problem is when you're a hardworking student, which I know a lot of them, I think as a kid, I thought I was quite exceptional. I thought I was like the most hardworking. But really, I know a lot of very hardworking students. Most of my students get mostly A's. Like grade inflation over the years, you can look at graphs. It's a thing. Test scores have accelerated and increased. It's a thing. Like everything's sort of being inflated. Everyone thinks they're quite exceptional. And everyone is in their own right? But we're all trying to kind of abide by the same metric, or kind of fall into the same metric. So I think today when I see students who are really hard workers, and a lot of them are girls who really wrap up their whole identity in the effort that they put out. And they think that if they don't get into a top 20 school, US News and World Report, I wish they would go away, but they're not anytime soon. If they don't get into one of those schools, then it's like all of their work was for nothing. And I've had students tell me this before, right? Like if I don't get, that's like the final mark of approval, right? Along the way, we get smiley faces, we get A's. The final mark of approval is the elite, the level of school that you can get into. And the most selective is quote unquote the best. And it's so you've wrapped up your entire self-worth in a pretty random review process done by humans who may or may not be having a good day. And you've just, based your whole worth in that. And it's very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous.
And the incoming classes at those schools just aren't very big. Like, I mean, you're not talking about the top 20 is going to take, 100,000 students.
No. No, you're talking about, let's not even look at an Ivy. Let's look at Berkeley. You're looking at like 90,000 applicants. I mean, I would argue that probably most of them are pretty qualified to go. And so then it just becomes a matter of splitting hairs, So yeah, you're working against a lot of sort of flaws in the system, but just also a human process. And you tell students this, of course, but a 17-year-old is still going to believe that there's something personal in that rejection, right?
Well, you get them late in the process, right? Somewhere earlier, it became very important to them, right, that as a measure of all these 12 years of work that they've put in, that this is what I'm supposed to get. This is how this is the payoff for all these sacrifices and everything else. And it's what they told themselves when times were dark, like, I'm doing this because I'm going to make this happen.
Yes.
And it just, Greenfields, we'd almost call that setting up for an unsafe failure, right? Where it's like, for something that the odds are, it's like going to be a professional athlete. Like, I'm going to keep doing this because I'm going to be a professional athlete, and I'm going to sacrifice all these other parts of my life for this one thing. You're
Right.
not, the odds of you becoming a professional athlete are so small. And honestly, like, if you're going to be a professional athlete, you don't know it when you're young. People tell you, right? Because it's like, you are that much better than everybody else around you. Like, you are just pure athlete who is heads and shoulders above everyone around. You're not competing for spots. They're figuring out how to keep you challenged. And unless you're in that space, you shouldn't be banking on and making all these sacrifices for something that's very likely not going to happen. Find
Right.
other ways to broaden who you are and unfold yourself in broader directions to see what else is in you.
Well, and that's why I love the book Range. In the beginning of that book, he talks about, even extreme athletes sometimes arrive at their athletic aptitude or the pinnacle of their athletic ability later on. So we all kind of arrive at different places at different times. Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
when you're talking to high school students, how do you help them figure out the best way to find the right school for them,
Right.
rather than what's the best school I can get into?
And I had to correct my dad actually recently. He was like, yeah, my daughter, she works and places students in college. I'm like, no, I don't. I don't place anyone anywhere. I don't get anybody into school even. I had a parent once ask me like, how will you help get our daughter into Stanford? I'm like, I won't. Like, that's not what, I don't get people into particular schools. I counsel them. I'm truly a guide on the side, helping you navigate these things. A lot of this is meeting them where they are. And I think I told you this story. My great aunt whenever I would complain about the music at church, they were trying to make it more and more hip to attract young people. She would say, whatever brings them in the pews, Alex. So, you have to sort of like meet people where they are. And even though you know that their belief system is maybe flawed or based on bad information, you have to meet them and their parents where they are. And you also have to accept that they're going to be spending more time with their parents than me, and they're going to be spending more time with their friends than me. And so they're going to hear things that contradict what I'm telling them, and they're going to hear a lot of things that come out of the rumor mill. So within that, what I'm doing initially is giving students some objective assessments. I think everyone has different feelings about assessments, but I do think they're a great conversation starter, because it's not coming from me. It's not coming from mom and dad. It's a more objective test. And so we always start with an assessment. And then amazingly, depending on when a student comes to work with me, if they're coming in at the end of the junior year, we are starting to work on college essays. And a lot of these very pragmatic students, they're like, we need to write college essays for my college application. I'm like, yeah, you're right. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, and it's like a form of journaling and I'm going to get some really good stuff out of you. Right. So it's this amazing journaling process that, it's checking the box. It's a thing you've got to do on your to-do list. But I look forward to the essay writing process, because it's when really you get the meaty stuff that comes out. And I get to know students in a much different way. And they start writing about their parents' divorce. And then all of a sudden you have all this context. Oh, this is a big reason why you're experiencing so much stress. Or you find out about a diagnosis of depression in the family. Oh, this is why you're nervous about going out of state, right? So you get all this context behind a lot of what you're seeing in just your counseling sessions on the surface. And so, what I'm trying to also give students a hall pass, a permission slip to do, is to take what they're genuinely interested in and challenge themselves to be creative enough to think about what they could do to continue doing more of the stuff that they love, and have it feel practical, like have it feel like you could base a life around that or build a life around that. So I love showing students diagrams that show college major and related to career, because there's almost no correlation. Like, open up the gates and look at what do you actually like to learn about, because you're going to have to do 4 years of coursework. And if you don't like those courses, your chances of dropping out go up. So we want you to finish. We don't want you to just get into X university. We'd love for you to finish. And so you're more likely to finish and be happy about that experience if you actually enjoy the classes you're sitting in. So I encourage students to look at all kinds of different majors, even the ones they thought were absurd, and the course requirements within those majors so that they can actually picture themselves doing those things. It might sound good to be a business major, but look at the courses you're going to take. Does that actually look like something you'd like to do? So we spend a lot of time doing that. We say, even though major has really very little to do with future career, it does have a lot to do with what your college experience will be like and your happiness level in school. And then we do a bit of, quite a bit of career exploration, because a lot of students today, so this is Generation Z, these are the pragmatists, and early research on this generation suggests that they're much more pragmatic than the millennials, much more financially literate, and much more risk averse. And so knowing that, and of course that's like casting a pretty wide blanket statement on a lot of students, there's a lot of variation of course, but knowing that that's kind of a general trend, what I can't do with this generation that I could do with millennials is just say like, follow your dreams, like do whatever feels good. They're going to look at me like I'm just totally crazy. Even though I kind of believe that to some extent. But it's delivering these ideas and breaking down these walls in like bite-sized increments so they don't run for the hills, right? And sort of showing them wackadoodle jobs that exist that no one knew would exist 10 years ago, showing them entrepreneurs and creatives who are making a lot of money, right? Because making money is still important to them. So I can't completely ignore that. But it's like, let me show you what this person who went to the College for Creative Studies in Detroit did to, design the next coolest shoe that's now going for $300 a pop, right? So, it's revealing these things that they just don't see. They're just not getting exposure to in school.
And
And
the worldview is so small. Like it's what you're exposed to in terms of school. It's very limited. Like, oh, I can be a teacher. I know what that is, right? And it's almost the same as like when they were younger, right? The only things police officer, astronaut, fire person, teacher. Like you're going to pick one of those things because those are the only things you know.
And by the time I see them, it's pretty much engineer and financial analyst or financial advisor. That's pretty much what I'm seeing. And actually, there's still quite a few students who want to be a doctor. But I used to see actually more of that. About 5 years ago, there was a pretty big dramatic shift towards the financial sector and engineering. So I see a lot of that. There's just a huge emphasis on high income careers, but also think back, if you rewind the clock, what were we pushing? We were pushing STEM. And so engineering makes total sense given what we were really pushing, in education.
Yeah, and society's become a lot more, popular society, right? I think of the Kardashians and, these types of things who like have developed these huge social followings. So much of it is about money and image. And there's one of my kids showed me this thing, Mr. Beast. Don't know if you've heard of this YouTuber guy.
No, I haven't. Oh my gosh.
He gets people together and like a couple of his friends like, hey, we're going to eat a $10,000 pizza. And it's like this gold crusted, like crazy thing. And this is what young people watch, right? Where it's like, oh, the last one to keep their hand on a Lamborghini gets to keep the Lamborghini. It's like, this isn't how the world's going to work, right? But so much of it is about, well, even I need the latest iPhone, the technology piece. So much of it is about money.
Yep.
And so therefore money must be the thing that we need to make people happy.
Right.
And so I think a lot of that plays into it.
Well, there's also an interesting phenomenon of fear of losing money. And, keep in mind these kids who I'm working with, who are in high school and college now, a lot of their worldview was shaped by their parents' fears post 9/11 and also in the 2008 recession. So I see those as being pretty big factors in how their parents reared them. This very much more of a caution tape generation, with the BPA-free water bottles and all. Like there's a lot more precautions with this generation, and every generation has seen this to some extent, I guess you could say. But there's a real like visceral fear of losing money. Even my students who come from a lot of financial security, they really, I think, saw the impermanence of financial security. I think perhaps when they were younger during the, recession, they would have been, pretty young at that point. And that can definitely have a formidable experience on or impact on your worldview. You also see like, while you're saying, yeah, we have like these Mr. Beast or whatever, this kind of stuff happening, you also have students who are telling me before their parents tell me, oh, that school's too expensive. Oh, that's unreasonable. We're not going to pay that much. With my millennials, it was the opposite. It was the parents saying that's way too expensive, and the kids could really care less, So that has been an interesting shift that I've sort of seen anecdotally, and that I've also read in the research on this group of kids. But
when I can only imagine that the whole COVID pandemic isn't going to make it any better, right? Or different. I'm not saying I'm no judgment there, right? I think
right.
Thinking about what the value, because when we went to school, or at least when I went to school, it was $6,000-7,000 a year, right? So, go and enjoy, and 4 years, 5 years, whatever it takes, and go and have an experience and basically grow up and, figure out how to live on your own, figure out how to manage your own things. And then it's a stepping stone into post-school life. Now, when you're looking at 40 grand a year, like that's a whole different, and I feel like I've been quoting that number for too long now, because now I'm like, I was at University of Michigan
we're
for a
looking
cubing
at
tournament.
$65,000-$70,000 a year now is for a private university. When you look at, a lot of my students in California who are in-state students, their parents' jaws drop when I tell them that they're going to be paying close to $40,000 a year for in-state tuition. Out of state is getting close to $60,000 a year for the public universities. So, I mean, this is where we've totally crushed and destroyed the ability to really like, without being, I won't be negative the whole talk, I promise. We've sort of like crushed this luxury of learning for learning's sake, right? We talk about this liberal arts education and this romantic ideal of learning for learning's sake, and having a chance, like you said, Rob, to grow up, to sort of learn about the world in a safe cocoon that is college, and to be able to sort of rub up against some ideas that you're uncomfortable with, to share ideas, brew up new ideas like that. Like college is this amazing incubator where cool new ideas emerge, right? But we've just put this incredible burden on that and forced it to become this super practical, pragmatic, vocational, career-oriented experience because of this cost, this exorbitant cost. Like you don't just like go like grow up and learn for $60,000 a year. Like how privileged does that sound? But it shouldn't be that kind of privileged experience. Everyone deserves the right to learn for learning's sake. Everyone deserves the right to sit and read philosophy for hours if they want to, right? That shouldn't be a privilege or shouldn't be a luxury item. But the cost makes it that, right?
The big things that's happened in the last 15 years or so is kind of the commoditization of knowledge, right? So much of that stuff you would normally could only be exposed to in college, back when they, I remember when I was looking for schools, it's like, how many stacks does the library have, right? That was the main measure of like the quality. Look at all this knowledge we have locked away over here in this really big building. It's like, wow. And now all that stuff's just available online, or through other means where it's relatively easy to get to. And so when you take out the learning piece of it and say that can be gotten almost anywhere, right? And there isn't a whole lot of doing going on. You're not learning how to do new things unless you are in some, and even then a lot of that's graduate school. But like if you're on a professional path where it is engineering or medical or some other things, like you are doing some more hands-on pieces and getting stuff done. So then you're left with like the college experience, right? And now, well, there is no college experience, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic and no one's even allowed to be at school.
Yep.
But they still want to charge you the $40,000 to not be at school.
It's a really interesting point. You're like, okay, so you're charging me $40,000 for it's the acquisition of information, right? I wouldn't even call that learning. I mean, reading a book, you might be acquiring new information and new opinions or new facts, but I don't know if I'd call that learning. And then there's also training, which is something different. I mean, keep in mind the college of the 17th century, which only men could participate in, and it was very much of a religious experience, but it really was this chance to figure out, like, explore the meaning of life. Maybe not figure it out, but explore the meaning of life. And then you went on to become a doctor or a lawyer or a priest, right? But it was like, this was when you could really explore these more abstract philosophical ideas. And then you went on to your training. And there's something to that I've always really admired. And really, I feel like in my career, I've thought a lot about what that could look like in a modern day context.
Yeah, so one of the things I've been talking about at Greenfields is like the K-16, K-Life type view of education. And so, my long-term plan is that we will have an ability, I don't know if I'd call it a college, right? But we will be able to bestow college degrees upon people who have accomplished those things and create an environment, a community where people can come in at any age to learn the things they want to learn how to do the things they want to learn how to do, and create just a lifelong learning community. I think that's the type of place where things need to be headed to. Whenever it was the 1890s, Harvard, and it was like, hey, this is what college is going to be like. Here's what you need to learn in high school, the end. And 130 years later, that's still where we are. I think the disaggregation of the degree, I think there's a lot of really interesting things that are happening. And you see some of it, like big changes like that, the credentialing. I think student enrollment is down over 1 million this year versus the prior year. I think will be even lower this coming year. And now we've got the UC system. I believe all the Ivy League schools and a number of other, it just keeps coming, that are making, at least for this coming academic year, no, not this coming year, it'll be the year after, right? So admissions for the year after that, standardized test optional, which I think is a big change, especially when, and I feel bad for the kids right now who were told this is the game, right? You nail this test, you get good grades, you get to go to your Harvard, whatever that was. And now, and my son's one of them, right? He's a junior right now. He's an amazing test taker. And now you're taking out one of his, what he would consider to be a differentiator for him. And what was like the golden ticket, now I'm going to get my 99th percentile and it's not going to matter. Well, I should have been working on these other things.
Yeah. Well, it's a movement that was in the works before COVID, but we're not seeing a ton of evidence yet that the schools are going to be test blind, or completely test blind, or that scholarship committees are going to be test blind, or honors programs are going to be test blind. I still tell students to send them in just because it's so early to really feel confident in telling students to not send in any scores, because you've got schools that don't take letters of rec, don't take transcripts, they only do self-reported grades, don't take essays. So your only metric now is that GPA, and once you get rid of testing. And so I do worry about that and how you can possibly have a holistic review of a student. But there's also a lot of, discriminating elements to these tests, which we know, and this has been discussed for years. And so something did need to happen. And I think COVID, I wish it could have happened under other circumstances, but I actually am really optimistic about some of the changes that will be forced on us because of COVID. I wish, again, it was under different circumstances, but sometimes I think you have to have an emergency to really change things. My hope is that then we'll start to see college as something you truly, like you talk about opting in, right? You opt in to school because you see the value in it for you on your journey, and you should be able to on-ramp and off-ramp, right? At any point. School, I tell students all the time who want to take a gap year, don't worry, college will be there. Like when you come back, like this cool opportunity might not. So do that first and then come back to school. And truly make it this lifelong experience. I mean, I think it was the vision behind the community college, right? The American community college is actually a really novel invention.
No, and now, especially with the cost of 4-year degrees, it's become very much about, oh, well, go start your first 2 years at community college and then transfer. It has been like just sucked into the race to nowhere, right? It's
just become the next stepping stone, right? Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely, but I am optimistic though about some of these changes that might, come out of COVID. One of the sad features though, is that we're going to see a lot of lovely small liberal arts colleges shut down. Those colleges that I think are historically more student-centric than some of the larger research universities where it's publish or perish. So I'm sad about that, but who knows what will come out of that? There might be a lot of good that comes out of that too.
It's going to be interesting for sure. And I think it'd be really interesting to have like a 2-year program that was more not like how most people think about associate's degrees, but like, because in the end, like a lot of the stuff that ends up getting covered in an associate's degree is just really a rehash of high school. Correct. To make sure you got it.
Correct.
All right. That's what the first 2 years of college are. So, but if we could really take it and make it a much more interesting and compelling liberal arts experience, in the old frame of it, I think there is a big market for that.
Agreed.
But to be 4 years and 2 years is a rehash, and I'm spending $40,000 a year, like, and it's debt, the only debt in this country you can't get out of. Like, yep. You need a big job coming out of it just to pay it off.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it does put a lot of pressure.
Yep.
But I'm hopeful too. I think there's a lot of good changes coming down the pike. I am nervous about the testing change being forced in with, to your point, like, no context to it, no retraining of admissions officers, nothing else kind of supplementing what it means. It's more an acknowledgement that, like, yeah, with the way this year ended, it's not really fair to include that. And I think, it's almost an ends justify the means, right? So it's like, well, if the means was we needed a pandemic that blew up the testing structure, that got people thinking differently about it, I think it will stick with a lot of places. And I think the whole testing optional versus test blind thing is an interesting piece. Like, so I don't know how a admissions officer wouldn't think somewhat negatively about the person who didn't send in their test scores when you were allowed to.
Well, it creates this whole new pecking order, right? I mean, I'm already seeing it with my students. They really want to show off the fact that they still got the high GPA and they still did well in their APs and they still did well in their standardized tests despite a pandemic. It's like the new badge of honor. Like, what were you able to accomplish during this pandemic? And I started seeing that at one of the schools that I do work with, where they were allowed to choose if they wanted to go pass, fail, or a grade. And I got nervous about that because it was already in the early days, it became this new hierarchy. Well, I'm going to show that I can persevere through a pandemic and I'm going to go with the letter grades, and that's dangerous. I think that's dangerous thinking. But
I've seen it play out at the administration level during this. I have 2 kids in selective enrollment high schools in Chicago. One is known as, super competitive, your kid is going to go to it. Well, it's not true, but everyone buys in, like, these are the smartest kids in the whole city of Chicago who are staying in the public school system, and they are going to go on and do amazing things. And we're going to judge ourselves. We'll never admit it, right? In fact, we'll say, we don't care about test scores, but it's just not true.
Right.
And so they're doing my kid is there. He's got 5 to 6 hours of work a day to do. My daughter, who is at another not easy to get into selective enrollment, high school, big program, an hour and a half a day. And I think it is very much about, like, hey, we need to show them that grades are keeping up, that our test scores are going to stay high. And I think that was really the driving fear of, if we kind of back off, what's going to happen to the test scores for these kids? And then what are we going to do?
Right. Yeah, we need to actually have some patience and grace, right? I used to work with this woman who said, patience and grace, Alex. We need to really, I think, reevaluate what we are expecting of young people whose brains aren't even fully developed yet. One of the things, I love the book, How to Be a High School Superstar, really talking about the value of free time and giving kids uninterrupted, unplanned free time. And one of the things, again, another positive that I think is maybe coming out of this unintentionally, out of this pandemic, is, what do you do when no one's looking? What do you actually want to spend time doing when you don't have your whole day scheduled and programmed? right? I mean, this is what we see happening right, with Greenfield. This is one of the things I love. Our daughter is, we have year-round school at Greenfield, so our daughter is still in school, but she's basically done at 1, and then she's out, because of online learning, she's out exploring, catching frogs, and learning a ton that way too. And this free time is so valuable and so important, and that's actually where you come up with some of your best ideas, some of the coolest projects. And when you're thinking like a pragmatist, like so many are, what I can say to those people is that's actually what colleges want to see, right? Like that's actually the differentiator, right? When you're looking at Ivy League acceptances, it's assumed that you've got the 4.0, that you've got the 1500 SAT, that you've got the 5s on your APs. And then what, right? Like, so show us that you're more than just a student. Show us that you're a human who has genuine curiosity. And that comes out of free time. And it's something that my students don't have. So I'm really, I was really hopeful that we would see some of that free time during this pandemic. Again, I wish it was under other circumstances, but sometimes it just has to be forced on you.
Yeah, and again, I'm hopeful that with some people it's going to stick, where it's like, hey, this chase of having to do all this homework and everything else, and getting to see what your kid actually does while they're at school, and like, really, this is what we do. And a lot of parents just kind of like giving up on it at some point, where it's like, I'm not going to hound them to do the work. I'm not going to like keep beating them over this. Like, you don't care about it. The grades don't matter. Like, go and be a kid, go and live. And for the kids to have that time to be able to go and figure out like, oh, what do I want to do when I have free time? Because I can't do the sports that I'm supposed to do. I don't have all the homework, school isn't taking up that much time. Now I get to feel what it's like to be something other than what's almost become a professional student.
Right. Well, and what I love is like with I think I told you before the call, my daughter got pooped on by a chicken. So she was out playing in the field with these chickens, really, learning about farm animals, right? And I was thinking about how Greenfield is so flexible and so student-centered that I could probably go to her guide and say, hey, like, is there a badge for that? Like, can we acknowledge this as some sort of, accomplishment and learning experience? Because it is a learning experience. So rather than, forcing students to fit into a certain set of standards that are measured the same way at the end of the year, it's like, what are you doing? What are you exploring? What do you enjoy? And how can we kind of acknowledge you for that?
And that's a big part. We try to blur the lines between what's happening in school versus at home, and that the whole idea, like, education is life, right? You are learning not just what your parents and teachers are trying to teach you. You're taking lessons from everywhere. Like, we are learning machines. And so we're just sponging in all this stuff, and you should be getting credit for anything you're putting in a bunch of work on and you're being diligent about, or you're chasing your curiosities. I haven't figured out how to give, credit for like sit with yourself for a while time. In Boy Scouts called Order of the Arrow. And it was 8 hours of no talking. So you went and just worked on a project in the woods and you weren't allowed to talk.
No talking, yeah.
And, I may or may not have made it 8 hours, but it's interesting.
People pay thousands for that now. It's called a silence retreat, right?
But I think getting around that and giving people space to figure out who they are and helping them kind of pull at the edges and unfold who they could be and getting a broader view of the world is a big part of what Greenfields is about. Mm-hmm. So Alex, thanks so much for coming on today. It's been great having you. It's one of the great things about our community and all the people in it is you forget the wealth of information and experiences they have. Like, sometimes I forget, like, oh yeah, she also wrote that book and she's got this huge thing and she works with all these students to try to expand their views and get them into college. Oh, that's right. And she's Rory's mom. And so I appreciate you coming on and being able to be your full self in that way today.
It's a joy, and I always love chatting with you guys. So thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe and tune in next time for a fresh new episode of Education is Life.